Welcome to another exciting episode of the Entrepreneur Speaks podcast, where we bring you inspiring conversations with entrepreneurs, business leaders, and change makers from around the world. I'm Kofi Anyemedu, and today we have a special guest who's made a significant impact in the world of business, investments, mergers, and acquisitions. Joining me today is Robert Levin, a seasoned entrepreneur, investor, and the driving force behind CIS Ventures. With a wealth of experience in identifying and scaling businesses, Robert has successfully navigated the challenges of entrepreneurship, leading multiple ventures to growth and success. His expertise in mergers and acquisitions has helped numerous businesses transition and thrive in competitive markets. In this episode, we'll dive into his entrepreneurial journey, uncover the lessons he's learned along the way, and explore his insights on business growth, leadership, and navigating the ever-changing investment landscape. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or a seasoned business owner, this conversation promises to be packed with valuable takeaways. So without further ado, let's welcome Robert Levin to the Entrepreneur Speaks podcast. Welcome to my show, Robert.
Oh, thank you, Kofi. It's great to be with you.
All right. So to start off, can you share a bit about your early life and what shaped your entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah. So early life, I was born in Philadelphia in 1970. So I'm 54. So it goes back quite a ways. And very normal middle class upbringing. We moved to a suburban neighborhood just outside of Philadelphia when I was very young. My father was an accountant. My mother was a hospital administrator. Sort of, your regular, nothing super exciting, but I did have that kind of entrepreneurial itch early on. I actually got my first job when I was 13 years old, working in a clothing store, unpacking boxes and putting shirts on hangers and putting them into the store. So, just basic work. But immediately, it was like, it was great because it gave me a little bit of independence, right? I had some responsibility. I had, my own money. I could, it wasn't a lot of money, but when you're 13 years old, anything is, it feels like a lot of money. And I always just liked having that independence and having, to be able to, take care of myself and have some responsibility. I kind of went through my high school years. I think the first real entrepreneurial activity, if you want to call it that, was we had some. There was a friend of ours whose parents used to travel quite a bit, and he had some older siblings, and we would pay them to go to the store and get us a keg of beer, and then we would throw a party and charge all of our friends to come, and it was our own little thing, which I'm sure lots of people did back then. But again, it was an entrepreneurial kind of thing where we were just and we would do that several times a year, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that was really the thing that sort of started me off on that journey, was kind of hey, this is great. We're making some money. People are liking us and they're paying attention, and we've got a good thing here. And then ever since then, it's always been my desire to sort of be self-sufficient and be able to sort of take care of myself and family and friends and things like that.
So we'll try and unpack a lot of the things you said in your introduction as we converse. By reading about you, I realized that you're a Navy veteran and you've also attended the Harvard Business School. So looking at serving in the Navy, attending business school, how do you think that your time in the Navy, how do you think has influenced your leadership and your business decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question, because those two things really do, obviously they're very different. But when I think being in the military, and particularly in the Navy, and what we did was, there's a whole host of things. I mean, one is you realize very, very quickly that you are part of a much bigger thing, right? You're part of a bigger team. You're part of a bigger, everything from whether you're on the ship, your ship is part of a battle group, your battle group is part of a larger thing, so you get a sense of like, okay, there you have to learn how to work with a team. You have to be able to follow directions. You have to be very disciplined. One of the things that continues to, that I continue to kind of carry on through this day is, we were in the Navy, there's nothing left to chance in the military, right? So everything's got a checklist, everything's got a script, everything's got a way that things are supposed to be done. And if you don't do them, there are really bad consequences, right? So, if you screw something up in business, you could lose some money, maybe that. But if you screw something up in the military, and I did serve during Desert Storm, people will die, people will get hurt, things, your mission won't get done. So it teaches you a lot about discipline. It teaches you a lot about leadership, in terms of how to lead, what a good leader looks like, again, being part of a team, being part of this much, much bigger thing. And when you're young and starting out in the world, you think you know everything. You think you've got all the answers. You think it's you against the world. And very quickly, the military takes that away from you and says, no, 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 you are part of this. This is your job. And everybody, the other thing that's interesting about people who've been in the military will tell you is, I don't care what you accomplished before you got there. Everybody's exactly the same when you get to boot camp or when you get to your first ship. Like, you're at the bottom and you got to work your way up, and you work your way up by, proving that you can actually do the work. There's no ability to sort of fake it when you're doing it. So it taught me a lot of discipline. It taught me a lot about working with teams, being part of a bigger group, a bigger unit. It teaches you to be very mission oriented, right? So we've got an objective, and there's a little bit of some of it doesn't translate into the real world, which is where maybe the business school side of it is, because in the real world, in the military, it's like if somebody tells you to do it, you do it, unless it was, obviously illegal or whatever. And you can't take that same mindset into the business world, because people, can't just order people around and tell them what to do. So you've got to kind of learn the balance of that. But even the best leaders in the military, they don't, of course, if they have to give you a direct order and do it, they will. The great leaders that I've been around will, they lead from behind. They make sure that you have what you need and you understand it. And sometimes you just have to do what they say because there's just a bigger mission there. Going to business school was a very different experience, obviously, where now it's a world where you're taking some of that same discipline, but now you're applying it to really problem solving. I would say the biggest thing that you get out of a business school, and I think the biggest thing that entrepreneurs do, is solve problems, right? But a big one of the things that you really they try to teach you when you're going through that is you have to solve problems. You have to solve the right problem. So you have to be able to unpack, okay, what's going on inside this business? Why isn't it performing, or why is it performing? And really get down to the root of what's going on. And I think those two things, having that military background and being part of a team, and then learning how to sort of think strategically and think critically and really ask that next question to get to the root of what the problem you're trying to solve, or what's occurring in the business. I think those two things, kind of come together, really nicely.
All right. So you currently run CIC Ventures. Can you tell us a bit about your company, exactly what you do?
Yes, CIS was it was actually, I founded in 2009, right after the great financial crisis here in the US. I had a business at that time that was a specialty finance company. And we were doing a lot of business with Wall Street banks and insurance companies and hedge funds and, that whole world. And obviously in 2009, economy blew up, and, we had to kind of rethink, what we were going to do post the crash. And one of the things that the initial reason that we set up CIS was to try to find distressed assets, try and find things that had had good value, had good fundamentals, but were just getting, because of the market in general, people needed liquidity, they wanted to sell. And that was the initial motivation for creating CIS. Over time, we shifted. Obviously, I think we made two big pivots over the last, call it 16 years. The first was to not try to buy these, distress slash toxic assets. We had, it was a good theory. And this is one of those things that you sort of learn as an entrepreneur. It was good in theory. It was very difficult in practice to get done. And certainly it was going to take a lot more capital than we had access to. So we pivoted away from that to looking at funding businesses coming out of that crisis. Like they're going to still be very good businesses that will emerge from this situation. How can we take advantage of that? How can we start, investing in earlier stage businesses? And I had the benefit prior to that business, which was the specialty lender, of having sold my previous company. So I kind of understood what the landscape looked like, how hard it is to raise capital, especially in very turbulent times. And so initially we started that's why it's called CIS Ventures, in investing small amounts in a lot of emerging at that time. So remember what we're talking about is like 2010, 2011. E-commerce was a brand new thing, right? Like people buying online and, moving. It's not what it's like today. And, nobody really knew. If you think back, today it's I have a 24-year-old daughter, and she doesn't remember a time where you couldn't go online and buy something. But back then people were worried, well, are people really going to put their credit card into a website? Are they going to trust that they're going to get their product? How does this work if it doesn't fit? Like all of those things were still very unknown, but we saw a lot of interesting trends and things going on. So we started out in the venture space, and what happened during that period of time and when we started working with these companies is we realized that the capital that we were providing, the money was valuable, obviously, but there was money out there where we were really adding a lot of value. And a lot of the reason that we were getting the opportunities we were getting was because we knew how to work with the entrepreneurs. We knew how to coach them. We knew how to help them with strategy. We knew how to help them with their investors. We knew how to help them, build teams and grow businesses. So over time, I think that's the second big shift. And a lot of what CIS does today is, yes, we still do some investing and in different stages, but a lot of that work is helping entrepreneurs or it doesn't matter what stage they're at to grow their businesses, to help them. What I like to say is we tend to shine where businesses are in quote transition, right? So they're either growing very quickly and they're the wheels are starting to fall off, or things are starting to break, or they've been growing for a while and all of a sudden that growth stops and it starts to decelerate. Maybe they're looking to sell their company. I know we'll talk about this a little bit, or buy another business. So like any of these big inflection points for the business is all stuff that we've been through directly, right? So we understand it. It's not like theoretical. We've bought businesses, sold businesses, invested in businesses, merge businesses together. And so because of that hands-on experience, we can really get in and sort of, become part of that team for these entrepreneurs who are looking to take their company to the next level. And sometimes that just might mean exiting completely and they're just ready to,
Okay. So in your submission, you've touched on a couple of concepts that I still want us to unpack. So you've talked about mergers, you've talked about acquisitions, you've talked about corporate buyouts, and a number of things you do in your company. Can
Mhm.
you explain these three concepts and how different they are? Mergers, acquisitions, corporate buyouts. Can you really explain these concepts?
Yeah, sure. A merger is just that you have a company, or there are more than one company out there, and you're putting them together into one bigger platform. So, Kofi owns the bank down the street, and he wants to grow. And there's another bank, who's a competitor, and he goes out and buys that bank and merges it, creates one bank out of the two. And it could be, then you create, you buy another, and you create one bank out of the three, one bank out of the four. So in a merger, you're taking an existing business and folding it into or integrating it into an existing business, right? You're putting them together and we can talk about the reasons that you would do that, but that's a merger. And an acquisition, it's just that you're buying a business, right? You're going out and you're saying, hey, I don't have a business, but I really like the plumbing sector. I'm going to go buy, rather than start one from scratch and try and build it. There's one out there already. I'm going to go out and buy that business or acquire, that from them instead of starting from ground zero. And a corporate buyout is little, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's sort of a company has lots of different divisions and maybe they have a bunch of different products, and one of them they decide is not interesting to them anymore, or is not core to what they do. Maybe you're a manufacturing business and for some reason you started selling services. And now you decide, you know what, those services are nice, but they're not core to what we do. We want to just go back to our manufacturing roots. So we're not going to sell the whole business. We're not going to we're not going to merge with somebody else. We're just going to carve out this piece of it and sell that off to somebody else. So we're kind of, they can be called corporate buyouts or corporate carve outs, but you're taking like a division or a product line or some service line that's in an existing business and kind of separating it from the business and creating a new company just with that one business.
Well, thank you for bringing that clarity, for explaining
Mhm.
these three major concepts. But I still would like us to spend some time on these concepts and what you do in your business. So, what indeed are the key factors that one should consider before acquiring or merging with a company?
Sure. I mean, that's a big topic. Let's talk about acquiring first, because the merger is quite different. So when you're acquiring a business, again, you have to understand, what am I buying, right? And it all depends on the industry that they're in, the markets that they serve, all of there's a lot of factors that go into it. But first and foremost is, well, I guess you have to really start with, why am I buying this business, right? Why am I buying a business? And so let's go back to our plumbing. That you love plumbing and it's something that you're passionate about and you think you can do a really good job, but you don't want to start from scratch, right? You don't want to start from zero and build up a customer base and learn all the skills and do all that stuff. But there's a business out there that you think is going to help you to accelerate. That's why you would pay for it. Accelerate your, getting into that business. You find a local plumbing company and you decide to make an offer and say, hey, I'd like to buy your business. And that's great. And you talk about the price, and we can talk about how you value these things, but you say, okay, we come up with a price. I'm going to pay you $1 million for your business. The most important thing there is to understand, what am I buying, right? Am I buying tools? Am I buying parts? Am I buying inventory? Am I buying a customer list? Am I buying the brand and the goodwill? Like, what is it that I'm actually getting when I buy this business, right? And you want to make sure that you're at, after you write that $1 million check and you now own the business, that you actually got what you thought you were getting, right? So that's where the diligence process comes into play. And let's say that you're buying it because he's the local plumbing shop. He's been around for a long time. He's got a lot of brand value or goodwill built up in the community and a big customer list. And if that's really what you're after, because you think, hey, I can do a better job as a plumber, what I need is just, the brand and the goodwill to sort of, get started, you're going to want to concentrate on talking to the customers and understanding, the perspective and how they advertise, how they attract. So you really want to make sure that you consider, why am I buying a business rather than starting one, right? Because that's really the decision you have to make. Do I start from zero and build it myself from a clean slate, and I don't, it's all me from the beginning? Or do I want to buy something that's already existing and established, and will that help me to grow faster than if I just start from my own? So I think that's the biggest thing to consider is, one, why am I buying versus starting? And two, once you decide, okay, buying is the right way to go, you need to make sure that you need to be clear on what you're buying. And then your diligence will be all around that. When you're doing a merger, there's a lot more complexity to it. There's complexity to the first, don't get me wrong, but now you have an existing business, right? So Kofi's got, it's doing great, and you want to grow faster. So you go out and you make an offer to buy your competitor's bank. Well, now once you buy that bank, you've got to put these two things together, right? Well, that bank has their culture, it has their way of doing things, it has their systems, it has their customers, it has all their processes in place, and you have yours. And now you've got to put these together so that they work synergistically and that, it looks like and feels like one big bank at the end. And that's a lot more complicated. And don't forget, while you're doing that, you still have your core business, your original bank that has to continue to run and grow and do all the things that it would do without the merger. So mergers look nice and they sound sexy and people want to do it. But there's a lot of data, some of it that, that we've produced and some of it that has, it's just been out in the market by other people, that most mergers do not deliver the value that everybody expects. It's about 60 to 70% of them fail to deliver the value that was anticipated at the time of close. And having seen multiple mergers, and we could talk about, what makes it successful and where it does work, but the people don't anticipate and don't appreciate how hard that is to do. I mean, just think about it, right, Kofi? I don't know if you're married, you have a family, but imagine that you have your own apartment and you're living on your own and you're doing your own things and everything's fine. And then next thing you know, your girlfriend moves in. Well, wait, now everything's changed, right? The way you do the dishes isn't the way she does the dishes. The way you do your laundry isn't the way, and now you guys, that's just one person being brought into your life, right? Now imagine doing that with 300 employees, coming in and having to manage that and put it all together. And everybody focuses on the financial side of the transaction, the terms, the price, all that. And very few people pay attention to all this other qualitative stuff, the people, the processes, the systems. And there's years ago, when we first started CIS in New York, we had a lawyer who was working with us, and he was in charge of doing all of the documentation for the investments that we were doing. And he made this comment one day, which has just stuck with me forever because it was just such a great snapshot in terms of how people think about, these things when all you're doing is looking at spreadsheets and legal documents. And he said, man, this would be a really great business if it wasn't for all these people. And I'm like, well, the people are the business, man. Like, that's what you're getting. So you can't forget that you're not acquiring this sort of nebulous thing. It's people. And you have to be able to, if the people aren't happy, if the people don't, kind of buy into what you're doing and believe in the vision and the goals and the culture and everything else, a lot of the money that you just spent buying that business is going to walk out the door and never come back. So mergers are a lot more complicated just by their nature of having these existing enterprises, these things that are already running, and having to put them together, right? So imagine you're building a bicycle. Well, if you're just sitting in your garage and you're putting the bike together, and it's fine, but imagine now you're having to build that bike while you're riding another bike. It makes it a lot more complicated to do, and maybe you just need to slow down and stop the bike and build the new one. But you know you have to be conscious when you're doing a merger how difficult it's going to be, and be prepared for it. And we could talk about some of the things that will help you be one of those 30 to 40% that actually succeeds. And there are some sort of key things that will put you more on that side of being successful. But what happens in reality is, a lot of those things just get pushed to the side as, oh, that's soft, mushy stuff. We don't need to worry about that.
Okay. So I still want us to spend some time on this subject matter.
Hmm.
So you've been at this for quite some time. So in your experience, what indeed are some of the common mistakes that entrepreneurs usually make when they are preparing their businesses for acquisition?
Yeah. So when they're thinking about selling their business, so they're saying,
Yeah.
hey, it's time for me to sell the business. There's a few big ones, and it really, again, it depends on the industry and the size. So there's some nuance to it. But one of the big things that I think entrepreneurs don't do enough of when they think about selling their businesses is a question that we always ask is, can the business run just like it is today without you? Or are you the business, right? So if everybody's got to come and check with Kofi before they do something, or, no strategy gets done unless Kofi says so, or nothing and there's a lot of businesses that way because entrepreneurs are, they're controlling, they have visions, they want things done a certain way, which probably got them to where they are. But at a certain point, if you're turning that business over to somebody else, they need to know that that business will run just as smoothly, if not better, without you there. And a lot of the entrepreneurs and management teams that we work with who are thinking about selling don't appreciate that. So one of the big mistakes is not documenting processes, is not giving responsibility to other people in the organization to do things without having to check with you. That's a very, very big one, and one that most entrepreneurs get wrong, right? So they just think, it's worked so far, but remember, you're not going to be there anymore. Or the idea is at a certain point in time, you're selling the business and somebody else is going to be taking over. Maybe you stay for a little while for the transition, but they need to know that that business will run without you. And again, depending on how complex the business is, most of those processes aren't documented. Most of those SOPs, standard operating procedures or whatever, don't exist. And so if you can hand a buyer, a document, a website, whatever, but something that's written down that says, this is how this is done. This is how this is done. Anybody can come in here, pick this thing up, and continue on. Because the idea is when you sell your business, you're selling it for, the term uses a multiple, right? So it's like if you're doing $1 million a year of profit, of EBITDA at the end of the day, you're going to get some multiple of that, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times that amount. And the reason that company is willing to pay for that is because they think what they're paying for is that amount of revenue or earnings, and then what they can build on top of it. So the last thing that they want to have happen is that revenue and that EBITDA they built to start going away once you leave, right? So now they paid for something and it doesn't materialize. So making sure that your business is functional without you is probably the biggest thing that you want to make sure. It's the biggest mistake people make when they are going to market.
Okay.
Beyond that, I think the other thing is just the presentation of the business is very, very important. If you're, I'm just thinking about the last business that we bought about a year ago. The way that they ran their financial reporting was fine for them because they didn't share it with anyone. It was just for the ownership and the management team to look at, and it was great. But it took a long time to get that into a format that would be understandable by an investor. And so because of that, the more neatly packaged up the business is, the easier it is to understand by the investor. You don't want to be handing them reams of paper and, like all kinds of things. So getting your house in order and fixing some of the easy things to fix. I always use the analogy of a house. Like before you sell your house, just throw a coat of paint on the walls and make sure it looks nice and make sure that, it presents well. And, you've got all your user manuals and all of those things. Just make it a much better presentation. So the company that's buying it is like, this is great. Everything's in order. We don't have to sit here and fix your accounting system, for 6 months after we buy it. That's one less thing that we have to worry about. Great. So the better that the company is, presented and runs without you, the easier it is for that investor to make the decision to buy it, and the more they're going to pay you for it at the end of the day, which is really what you care about as the seller.
Okay. So, Robert, you are very passionate about mentoring the next generation of entrepreneurs. What are some of the key lessons you try to instill in those you mentor?
So let's start at the very beginning. Not everybody, people have a glamorized version of what an entrepreneur is in their head, right? They think it's, parties and private jets and Lamborghinis and, all these things. And they think, well, this is great. I'm going to start my own company. So I work for myself, right? And I'm going to have all this freedom and all this time. It's going to be great. I can do whatever I want. And that's just not the reality, right? The reality is pretty much the opposite, right? So when I've worked with young entrepreneurs, like, people who are still in university and thinking about going down the entrepreneurial path, or people who have started a business or thinking about it, the first thing I want to make sure is like, what I say to them is, you better love what you're doing. Like, you better love the problem you're solving or the product that you're putting out or the service that you're providing, because it's gonna suck. There's no other way to say it. Like, it is, I think the first few years, it is gonna be hard. You're gonna get no from a lot of people. You're gonna get, employees that don't show up and accounts that cancel on you and contracts that get rescinded and you're going to run out of money. Like there's all these things and you're going to work more and harder than you ever have in your life, right? If you're going to be successful. And if you think that you're doing this because you're going to have a bunch of freedom and free time and, um, and it, you need to check that maybe, maybe you're better off. And if that's not comfortable for you, maybe you're better off just going to work somewhere else. I had a good friend of mine. She decided to leave her corporate job and be entrepreneurial because she was not very happy there, and she thought that being an entrepreneur and being her own boss and calling her own shots was going to be, was going to make her happy. And she worked really, really hard. She raised some money, and she got to a certain point, and then she just burned out on it and sold it, pretty early. And she didn't do terribly, but she didn't make hundreds of millions of dollars, not enough to retire for sure. And I remember meeting with her about 6 or 7 months after that. She took some time off, and we sat down, and she's like, "Look, I'm really struggling with what I should do next." And I was like, "Okay," I thought maybe she had an idea for business. And her real concern was, he's like, "I don't think I want to start a business. I don't think that's for me. I've done it. I just, what I really like, I figured out over the last, during this time off is I just really like sales. I just like selling. I like going out, meeting people, making sales, doing my job. And then, at the end of the day, clocking out and going out with my friends and doing my thing." And I was just like, well, what's wrong with that? And she's like, "Well, I was an entrepreneur and I started and sold a business, and now everybody expects like that's my path. And am I going to?" I'm like, "Look, that's not, one, you tried it and you didn't like it, so clearly, and two, you're just trying now to live up to somebody else's expectations. If you just want to be a great salesperson, I mean, that's awesome. Like, just go out and be the best salesperson you can be, and do that, and you don't have to answer to anybody but yourself." And she now is a very, very, very successful salesperson for a technology business, and she loves it. And it's just taken so much pressure off of her, and she doesn't have to worry about all those things that entrepreneurs have to worry about. So I think that if I'm mentoring young entrepreneurs, it's really like, what do you think you're getting here? And just making sure they understand the reality of it. And if they're passionate about it and they really want to know, great. I mean, that's awesome. But just know what you're stepping into before you step into it. We didn't talk too much about this at the beginning, but I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I never really had, we talked about some of those early entrepreneurial things and all, in my in my youth. But when I got out of school, I went to be an equity analyst for a large insurance company, managing assets for them. That was, that's what I just thought you did. Entrepreneur didn't really, like, building a business never really crossed my mind. But once I got into that role, and I was lucky enough to really have a good mentor there and work on some very interesting projects, it did resonate with me as like, man, I really want, like, there was a problem that I saw in the financial market that nobody was addressing. And it just kept bugging me and bugging me and bugging me. And finally, it was just like, I'm going to see if I can't, fix this problem. And a person very high level in the finance department of a company near us and I were talking, and he said, "Look, we have this problem." And it was the exact same thing that I had been thinking about. And I just said, "Look, I'd love to try and fix that for you." And he said, "Great, give me a proposal." And I did, and he hired me. And then I had to go build a team and get an office and all that stuff. And so it was like by accident. Like, I had no idea what I was stepping into. And I think at one level that was good, because I think if I knew what I was getting myself into, I may not have done it. But it was really driven by this desire to solve this problem and fix, this thing that nobody else was, at least that I could find, was doing at the time. So there was like a real drive behind it, and it didn't feel like, I was building a business. But as we got to the end of that project with this one, remember, we had one customer, which I would tell any business now, don't ever do that. But as we got to the end of that project, we were like, oh no, like, we need another customer. Like, we didn't even think about sales and marketing and all that stuff. We just, like, we have this project, let's go work on it. But by when that project was winding up, we had 6 or 7 employees. We rented an office space. We had, like, rent to pay and payroll to pay and all this stuff. And we're like, wait, what are we going to do now? And we had to start thinking about, building up, an actual pipeline of new business coming in. I think that is kind of the right, I would say that's the right motivation to start a company. It's like there's a problem that you see or a product that you want. Ask you, like, how many times, like, have you interviewed entrepreneurs, you talk to entrepreneurs, and basically the thing that is their business is something that they wanted. Like, I wanted this product, I couldn't find it anywhere, I created it, and then, I figured, well, if I want it, other people might want it too, right? So you're really filling, some need that you have, or some hole that you have, or some problem that you see that just keeps nagging you. That's when you know that you're really onto something, and then you can build. If you're just doing it for the parties and the girls and the planes and the Lamborghinis, like, you're not going to have a good time of it at all.
Robert, let's spend some time talking about leadership and the role of leadership in managing and running a successful business. So, in your case, what leadership principles have really guided you in building and managing your business?
I think there's a few, and it is there's a few general things and then a few things that I think really sort of underpin that. And this is one of those things it's been refined over a long period of time, and like every other entrepreneur or senior manager, I've been to, well, the workshops and the books and everything, and tried to figure this out. And I've really condensed part of it down to some core principles that I try and follow. And I think that they are good as a leader, but they're also good just in general. And then there's sort of a concept underneath it that I think is that sort of drives a bigger vision. But to me, it's really some simple things. It's first and foremost, do what you say you're going to do, right? So if you tell somebody you're going to do something, do it. If you can't do it, tell them well ahead of time. Don't leave them hanging. So it's, do what you say you're going to do, show up on time. Seems like a very simple thing, but in each one of these, if we boiled them down to kind of, a sentence or two, but there's a lot of sort of meaning underneath them, right? So show up on time is, you want to sort of run a productive day, but it also shows respect to other people, that you value their time, that they're busy, you don't want to waste that time, and you lead by example. So if you're late to every meeting, you've just made it okay for everybody else to be late for every meeting. And then that gets, that starts to spin out of, and then everybody's late to everything all the time, and it's chaos. Do what you say you're going to do. If you commit to doing something, then you need to do, we just need to expect that you're going to get it done. And the same goes for the leader. And you have to lead by example. Show up on time, say please and thank you. Like, I think that's a big one. Like, these are simple things that people think there's all this wisdom around it, but it's just say please and thank you. They're people, you work with them, you're not better than them. You don't, the thing about leadership and actually being at a higher level in the company isn't that you have there are people who have worked for me, and usually in all the business they're way smarter than me at what they do. They know that, they know things that I'm never going to know about their jobs. And so, you have to appreciate that when you get into those management roles or leadership positions, what you have that makes it different is you just have a different view. You have either more information. If you think about it, if you're on a mountain and you're standing at the bottom of the mountain, you can only really see this much. But as you get up higher, you get to see a lot more. It doesn't mean that you're not, that the people who are at the bottom of the mountain are any less valuable, like they're there, but you just have a different view. And so you just have to appreciate that, say please and thank you, show up on time, do what you say you're going to do. Those kind of things, like outside of everything else, are really kind of the core. Because if you do that, then people will have agency, they'll feel valued. And I think that what that gets to kind of the underlying little parable, or there's this, I don't know if you're familiar with game theory and some of the things, around that. So, lots of people talk about it, but there's a concept called the stag's hunt. Have you ever heard of the stag's hunt before? Okay,
No.
so the stag's hunt basically says if we cooperate as a group, we can take down a stag, and we can all have a lot of food and a good meal and stuff, in reserve, and that's great. But if we don't, then we're all out there picking berries, chasing rabbits, and yeah, maybe we'll eat, maybe we won't eat, but and it's the core group. It's bringing those people together and saying, we're going on a stag hunt. We're not out here, looking to, pick apples or kill squirrels. That's what the goal is, and you can't do that. Like, I alone can't take down the stag. I need other people around me to do, their role in it. And if you think about that as like the company is just a group of people that come together for a common purpose, right? And that's what it is. So what is that common purpose? What is your role in that? And, what's the stag that we're going to take down as a group, right? And the bigger the group, the bigger the stag that you can take down, over time. So I think if you kind of think about, what the business is at its core, and you treat people with respect and you show up on time and you say please and thank you and you say you're going to do, I think those principles, if you just, keep that in mind, you can do a lot, right? There's the saying is, people overestimate what they can do in a month and underestimate what they can do in a year, right? So you've got to keep the big picture in sight. And that's part of the leader's job, is to keep people focused on the big picture, because on a day-to-day basis, you're going to have all kinds of setbacks and problems and issues and things that happen. And you can't let that get in the way of, like, hey, we're still making progress towards the big goal. And that's the leader's job, is to make sure that everybody knows where we're going and everybody understands their role in how to get there, and that you keep everybody on track and motivated towards that by doing those core basic things.
So just as you are aware, entrepreneurship, running your business is not a walk in the park. There are certainly ups and downs. In your case, how do you approach decision making, especially when it faced with uncertainty? How do you approach decision making in situations of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think you have to think about it and really. I know everybody, quotes certain people, but Jeff Bezos, I think, has the best construct around this, which is, what kind of a decision is it? Is this a permanent decision or is this a temporary decision? Meaning, once we make this decision, it's kind of the revolving door. Like, can we back out of it? What's the impact going to be when you make this decision? And then you want to scale your effort appropriately, right? So if this is a decision, a good way to think about it is, it's like, hats, haircuts, and tattoos, right? So when you're buying a hat, you buy the hat, you put it on, you like it. If you walk out and people laugh at you or you think it's cool, you just take the hat off, right? You're out a little bit of money. It's a simple decision. Great. Okay. A haircut is a little bit more permanent. You go in and say, hey, I want to, shave my head. And, all of a sudden you realize you don't like it. Okay. It's going to suck for a little while till your hair grows back and it's going to be awkward and all, but it's good. When you get a tattoo, it's permanent, man. Like, you better think really long and hard about that. So you want to make the hat decision really quick, because if you don't like it, you get a new hat. Take a little bit more time around the haircut decision, because it's going to be a little bit longer. Don't spend days and weeks and years on it, but take a lot of time with the tattoo decision, right? And I think you have to also understand that you're never going to have perfect information. That's a big um, that's a big thing for people to learn, because they're always just waiting for, like, just one more piece of information, or then one more this or one more that, and you're just never. And one is, it's just, that's not possible. There is no such thing. But two, things are always changing too. So as soon as you think you've nailed down this thing over here, and then you start looking over here, well, maybe something changed over here. Now we've got to go back. Because everything's constantly in flux, then you're never going to have perfect information. So you need to know, influences, what are the big levers, and, spend your time on those. Don't worry too much about the things that you have no control over, or that, are going to be changing constantly, and then you're not going to have anything to do with it. Because then, one of the things, by the way, we go back to the military. One of the things they teach in the military is no decision is the worst decision, right? If you just sit there and never make a decision, that's the worst thing you can do. So you've got to make a decision. You're never going to have perfect information. Just try and frame it around like, is this a hat, a haircut, or a tattoo? And then put the right amount of effort into it. And even when you get a tattoo, it's like, yeah, it's permanent, but you might not like it down the road, and maybe you have to modify it or change it. You go through some pain. Even the permanent decisions, we call them permanent. Nothing's ever permanent, but it's just a much bigger effort. And sometimes, by the way, the other thing that people will get caught up on is they'll tie the size, like the financial investment to that decision. Say, oh, this is a $10 million decision. We better be really careful about it versus this $10,000 decision, which you don't have to worry about. But that $10,000 decision could have big impacts. You don't want to just say, oh, it's a lot of money, or it's a big investment. Just that you have to understand, like, what does this decision impact? And you can make a small $10,000 decision that can have huge consequences for the business, but you didn't spend a lot of time on it because you just saw it's a small amount of money and we don't have to worry about it. So yeah, I would say decision making, you're never going to have perfect information, and try and spend the right amount of time. Try and understand what kind of decision you're making, and then just spend the appropriate amount of time when you make it.
All right. So, Robert, we are just about wrapping up, but you've been on this journey for quite some time, and I'd like us to share with us some key lessons you've picked up along this journey.
Yeah. So I think we've covered, especially from an entrepreneur's perspective, some of those core things. But in addition to, making sure that, entrepreneurship is right for you, and this is what you want to do, I think over time, and this is just one of those things that you have to go through, and you have to just sort of have it. Is you have to be willing to make mistakes, and you have to own those mistakes and learn from them. Early on, you're afraid to make mistakes. You're afraid of looking foolish. You're afraid of screwing up, losing money or whatever. And I think you've got to get much more comfortable with, like, hey, I'm going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. We don't learn from them and be humble about it. So I would say that's a big one that you have to be able to internalize and say it's okay to make a mistake. Nobody's perfect. We're all going to do it. You're going to hire the wrong person. You're going to, whatever, and just be able to. But I think the thing is once you realize it, just fix it quickly, right? So we have a tendency to think that it'll get better, or I can fix it. Like, you can't. Like, and we've all done it. Like, I give you like just a quick story. Like, we hired a chief operating officer in one of our companies, and on paper she was amazing, like just everything that you would want, and she was a disaster in the business. Like, she just could not run the business. But we were just like, nah, we're just it's gonna work out. And we waited so long to make that change, and other people saw it, and they were like, when we announced that she was leaving, nobody was surprised. Everybody was like, yeah, well, what took you so long, right? But we thought we could fix it, right? So be willing to make mistakes, own those mistakes, fix them early, move on, and just let them go, right? Learn from them, but don't let it impact your ability to make that next decision. Because a lot of people then say, oh, I screwed up this time, I'm not going to do that again. And then they'll be very hesitant to, hire that replacement or invest in that business or whatever. In addition to, just making sure that entrepreneurship's right for you and you have the right expectation and mindset and everything else, I think the biggest thing is just understand that you're a human being, you're fallible, you're not perfect, nobody's perfect. And I think the second part of it, going back to the stag's hunt kind of concept, is when you're in leadership and you're running the business and the people join your company, they're joining, right? They have options. They can go other places. They're spending their time with you. They want you to succeed. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of leaders feel like it's kind of like you're all alone, and, you've got to do everything. And, these people, you're just, they're against me or whatever, and they're not. And so you withhold information, or you think, I've got to keep this quiet. They want you to succeed because they want to succeed with you, and you have to let them do that. It's something you have to really be open to, is letting those people help you. Help do, like, you go in there and say, like, hey, we're all here on this journey together, like this, and they want to help you get there, let them. And I think early days, you're very controlling, you're very detailed, you're very in the weeds. You think you've got to be everywhere and that only you can do it. And the sooner you get out of that mindset and you can appreciate that, everybody's here to work together and to help, you as the leader or you as the management team, the much smoother things are going to run.
All right. So, Robert, before we sign off, what would be your general advice to my listeners and viewers?
I think, make sure that you're doing what you love. There's that old saying, like, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. So that doesn't mean like chase your passion and, there's all that stuff. Like, do something that really fulfills you, do something that you love to do, be around people that you want to be around. Life is life is very short. Time goes very quickly. And don't fritter it away on things that don't excite you and things that you don't want to do. Go out there and if you're happy, you will make a big difference in the world.
So, thank you so much, Robert Levin, for sharing your rich experience with us today. We wish you the very best.
Thank you, Kofi.
So, this has been another exciting episode of the Entrepreneur Speaks podcast. I'll come your way next time with another inspiring and exciting episode. I remain your host, Kofi Anyemedu. As always, do take good care of yourself and let's continue to keep hope alive. Cheers.